other explorers. But he's the only one to return in 2059, which is 40 years later, and he's only holding on by a very thin thread. So the book deals with everything from theology to love, to the arts, to friendship, to sex. And it's a physically thick book, but it also has a lot of heavy emotions, and she really balances that with a lot of love and a lot of humor. There's a lot of witty conversation. I think you were talking about that in this book. There's a lot of wit. I fell in love with all the characters. They're so achingly human. So again, just like Karen was saying, don't dismiss it because it's sci-fi. Mine does have a couple of spaceships in it, but just a couple, and they're very minimal. I wanted to mention about the world building, like Karen's books. It doesn't have a lot of time building the worlds either, because you are exploring it at the same time the characters are, because nobody's ever been there before. So she has a lot of fun creating an environment full of different creatures. And the characters in the book, like Adam in our Bible, get to name them. So you have things like turtle trees, little green guys, and Richard Nixons.
So how does she deal with the future? Because I think she wrote it in the 90s. Does she
Well, that's
give
a
us
good question,
idea?
because she actually wrote it in 1996. So she had to deal with two different future times. So she had to deal with 23 years into the future and then 53 years into the future. There are no cell phones. There are, what does she call them? Note screens, which are similar to computers. The Vatican still exists, and so do countries. The Pope is a Jesuit, which at the time she wrote it was pretty unimaginable. And it was only in 2013 that we have a Pope that's a Jesuit. Human jobs are being replaced by computers, which is not so hard to imagine these days. So there's a lot of fun to explore in that, and a lot of interesting ways that she got it wrong. So that's The Sparrow by Mary Doria Russell.
I have to say that's always been it's one of my favorite books since I read it way back in 1997. I reread it for a book discussion, and it was a fabulous book discussion. It's very provocative. It just makes you think about a lot of different things. It's a book that doesn't come out of your head very easily.
It's that philosophical running through it.
Right, right.
Jackie, you want to tell us another one of your books?
Me again. So, the next book I want to talk about is Always Happy Hour by Mary Miller.
We can get behind that.
Can't we? This is a short story collection about the lives of women. It is the author's second book. Her first was critically well received, but really still qualifies as under the radar. Most of the stories in here are quite brief, 10 to 15 pages. The title story, Always Happy Hour, is a little bit longer. They're very much vignettes. They often cover just an afternoon, sometimes just an hour in a woman's life. And they have this very voyeuristic quality about them, as if you're just sort of slipping into the character's head for a few minutes. Miller is excellent at developing characters quickly and organically. Backstories are established deftly and seamlessly, just right into the narrative. Within paragraphs, you have a sense of this woman. There's not a ton of action necessarily. In one, for example, it's just a woman in her alone in her boyfriend's apartment, kind of wandering around and looking at his belongings and sort of reflecting on their relationship. Another covers a weekend in which another woman considers she's alone in her apartment again, and she's sort of comparing her life to her roommates, who has a completely different existence. The stories are all set in the South, though they're in varying locales. Some are urban, some are rural. And there's a certain kind of rawness to them, an almost uncomfortable honesty about love and relationships. Back to uncomfortable. Everything I read is very uncomfortable. But it's very modern. It's almost very millennial in the details. I think though readers of any age, particularly women, would be able to relate to the situations. The stories are sometimes a little bleak, but they're always realistic, and they're very hard to turn away from. So if you're looking for some short stories when you're on the beach to kind of dip in and out of, Always Happy Hour by Mary Miller. And we are back to Jeff.
Thank you.
At the Cape.
So I said I was going to do one fiction and one nonfiction. So my second book is a nonfiction book, and I was originally going to talk about, I had thought I would talk about Henry Beston's book about Cape Cod, which is called The Outermost House, and that was published way back in the 1920s after he spent a couple of years living in on the beach in a small beach cottage right on the dunes, and describing his experiences on what is now Coast Guard Beach on the Outer Cape in Eastham. So the book was published in 1928 and has since become probably the natural history Cape Cod classic. The blizzard of '78 eventually destroyed the house, and it doesn't exist anymore. But I remember very distinctly a wonderful experience where I was on vacation there, and I found the exact spot where the house used to be. And I spent the whole day on the beach, just in a chair, reading the outermost house from start to finish in the exact location where he was. It was a neat experience. But then, just by chance, another book came out that I thought actually made a better book discussion or a book talk for the spring. And this is called The Outer Beach by Robert Finch, a 1,000-mile walk on Cape Cod's Atlantic shore. The title comes from the fact that he calculated that the amount, over a series of many years, all of the walks that he did on the beaches of Cape Cod totaled approximately 1,000 miles. And I thought this would be a better recommendation because Finch, he treads very similar ground to Beston's classic. And indeed, he refers to it often because it's such a benchmark. But this book is more of our world and our time and our era and our perspective. I think it would actually be really neat to read the two of them as sort of companion pieces because they bookend a century of change from the 1920s to almost 100 years later. So I think they go together really well. Finch has actually lived in several towns on Cape Cod over the years in various different places. And so he knows his subject really, really well from firsthand knowledge, but he has really lyrical writing. This is as close to literary nonfiction as I think I've read in a while. It's actually a collection of short essays that he's written over roughly like the late 1970s up until a couple of years ago. And so it's ideal if you're actually on the beach. You can read one, go for a walk, go in the water, read another one. He's divided them from south to north, so he starts, I'll have to do my demonstration. He starts on Monomoy, which is the sand spit that comes off of where Chatham is here, and then the essays kind of slowly go up the Outer Cape along the national seashore until they get to Race Point in Provincetown. So this is not about the rest of the Cape. It's he's really focusing on the outer beach, as it's called. There's no real requirement that you read the stories and the essays in that order, but I think it makes sense because he's kind of progressing through that. For people who really like nature writing, this is a mix of human history and its impact on nature, but he's really knowledgeable about nature. So he brings in lots of information about wildlife, especially bird life, because there's marshland, seashore, so all kinds of migratory seabirds, but also marsh birds and so forth. So if you're into that kind of thing, he goes into a lot of detail of that. I really think he beautifully captures the place and also the interaction of human and nature in a place that has seen a lot of change. It's a sandbar, after all, so change is part of the place. But it's also eternal in a certain way. And just to give you kind of an idea of the style of his writing, I thought I'd end with a quote. He says about the Cape, "We need to be overwhelmed like this on occasion by some unpeopled expanse of the land where we live, even to fear it a little, that it goes on so long without us." And that's really kind of what this is all about.
So for reader likes, is this Bill Bryson-esque, or is this something different?
A little, yes and no.
Right.
I would say if you like Bill Bryson, I definitely would suggest trying this. He delves into a place, and you all know I love books about place. The difference between them, I think, is Bryson is a bit more of a dilettante. He often is writing from the perspective of an outsider looking at a place, whereas this is obviously someone who knows it intimately inside and out. But there are a lot of similarities. Bryson's a little bit more humorous. I think he tends to see the absurdity in a lot of things, and probably more so than Finch does. But this is not a depressing book or overly introspective. There's actually a lot of really humorous and enjoyable stories about human characters, bird characters, and experiences, and I mean, there's no foxes. Or clowns.
All right, I might just read it.
But I do really love the mystery, the mix of the human and the natural coming together and how they affect this place. Yeah. So, if you like Bryson, I think you would definitely enjoy it. So that's The Outer Beach by Robert Finch, and it just came out this spring.
Very good.
And on to Leanne again, I think, right?
Yes. My second list is adrenaline. I call it addictive adrenaline. So that means mystery, suspense, thrillers, all those things you read, spies and assassins and chases and wonderful things like that. And on this book that I'm talking about today, which is 2 Days Gone by Randall Silvis, certainly fits in that category. It's a skillfully written thriller set in Western Pennsylvania, and it's about Sergeant Ryan DeMarco. He's a state policeman who is coping with his own personal tragedy as he takes on a horrific case, hoping to find some answers, even though he is somewhat of a friend of the suspect. The suspect, Thomas Houston, is a writer whose novels are both popular and respected. He has a snug berth on the faculty of an English department in a college. He has a beautiful family, too. So people are saying, why did he kill them? Did he snap? And if he did, and he didn't, then why is he running? Why is he vanished? And if he's so determined to run away, why does he keep hovering around the town, calling up people and quoting poems by Edgar Allan Poe? DeMarco has a feeling that the solution to this mystery may very well be, and a key to his whereabouts for that matter, it may be in his novel in progress. So he finds the novel in progress and he starts to read it and try to figure it out. He traces the suspect's steps and delves into this half-finished manuscript, interviewing people along the way. And he starts to uncover a real tangle of lies and deceit. I wanted to book talk this because it's a unique combination of pace, character, and musings on language and fiction. It's something you don't often get in this kind of a genre. And Silvis breaks up his novel into 4 parts: drive, deception, despair, discernment. And he also, the same parts of Houston's novel within a novel. And that really made me take notice of the writing. And there's something about a damaged character. Everybody here knows that that's something that attracts me. And in this book, there are 2 damaged main characters, Hunted Thomas and Haunted Ryan, and they have very compelling stories. The book switches between 2 third-person points of view. The author's first title in this proposed series, we're thinking, is a propulsive mystery. It'll just keep you turning the pages. And it surprised and intrigued me. And just when I thought it was over and I had it all figured out, I was so wrong.
So Leanne, what kind of reader would this appeal to?
Well, I think that if you like a really good suspenseful literary thriller, you will enjoy this. I think it will resonate long after it's finished. I think it's one of those books that you'll chew on a little bit, as well as enjoy the ride. It's a deft procedural, so if you like a good procedural, how to figure out how a crime is committed, this would work as well. It's also a psychological thriller. It sort of works with that because you have a lot of the workings of the mind going on. Both men in this book live very close in relationship to language. And that would be, I would think, a requirement for readers' complete enjoyment of this book. And it's a different way of looking at crime fiction. Houston's musings on language and fiction could bog down the pace if people really want a page turner. But it's well conceived, it's very well articulated, and if you like Connolly or Penny or Lehane or any of the writers out there today who are churning out procedurals, you'll probably like this too. But you have to be able to deal with a very grisly description of child murder. And I have to give that up front because that's the toughest part of this book. At one point, Houston, the writer, sees himself as a character in a story he is writing, and he tells himself the same thing he repeated often to his students. Trust the process, Houston. Trust the story. This keeps him sane enough to get through, to set goals, to figure out why he is running. He is both a fiction and a truth. You are a writer and a teacher. As a writer, it is your job to make order out of disorder, to find meaning in metaphor. And as a teacher, it is your job to explain that meaning to your students. And now you are the student. Find meaning and explain it. That is your job now. And that's what he does. He tries to use his experience in fiction to try to figure out why he's in the dilemma he's in. And these literary interludes glow, and they really did glow for me. But to the restless, they may serve to weigh down the story a bit. But on the other hand, readers with patience and a taste for sumptuous language will definitely find this novel a treat. So that was Silvis's 2 Days Gone. And Jackie, I believe, has something else for us from the Discovery Collection.
This is my last one. I actually chose a nonfiction title for my last talk. It's called The Glamour of Strangeness, Artists and the